Michael Saylor, Pectra, Fed meeting, macroeconomic data. We have a lot to cover in this short amount of time, so please stick with us. We have the most important update at the end. We have 4 major pieces of news to get ready for this week. So with that, let's get right into it. And if you're not a subscriber, we put out new shows every single day to show you what's going on in my journey. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them down below. I would love to hear from you. And with that, let's get right into it. Let's talk about this guy. This is Michael Saylor. He's got a picture of himself in a little field of tulips. And it says, tulip season ends, Bitcoin is forever. Now, what is he talking about? He's talking about the tulip mania bubble of the 1600s in the land of the Dutchland. And so what he's talking about is that Bitcoin is an asset that lasts forever. A tulip is a biodegradable, a biological thing that people paid astronomical sums for. It says being traded for cost of high-end houses in these 1600 times. And then as soon as it went up, it went down, and it only experienced a very short-lived run-up. Well, that's just not the case with Bitcoin. And one of the biggest pieces of news for this week is that Michael Saylor has signaled yet again that he's going to be purchasing. Typically, he says too much blue, not enough orange. Orange is the purchase dates when he buys crypto. And so as you see, there's a lot of orange on here, man. There's a lot of orange. And it appears that, he's signaling that MicroStrategy is going to be buying some crypto tomorrow or this week. So something very important to watch for. This comes on the tails of last week. He put out the quarterly earnings for MicroStrategies and talked about doubling the long-term purchasing of up to $84 billion of Bitcoin. So big news this week. What is Bitcoin doing? Now, this is fascinating. Not fascinating. This is textbook. Bitcoin took 8 or 9 days to bust through that $95,000 level. And as you can see, it's testing that $95,000 level floor of support. Now, it's a pretty strong ceiling of resistance that it took a lot of energy to bust through. Now, let's see if this $95,000 floor of support holds. Right now, it looks like it's holding. It's bounced off that floor. It came down to, 95 and 100 and some. So it's testing that floor of support. So good news for Bitcoin now. Obviously, we have a very big week. And another big thing that's happening, there's a couple big things happening on May 7th. That's Wednesday, May 7th. The first thing I got to talk about, and if you're not a subscriber on X or follower on X, join me on X. I'll put the link down below. It's Joe Knows the Crip. Crypto was too long, so we put Crip. It's not the other kind of Crip. It is the crypto. So in any event, the Ethereum has their Pectra update, and basically the Pectra is a word that combines Prague and Electra updates of the past called Pectra. And I don't want to get into this. Is a very technical upgrade, and so we could talk about this for a very long time in and of itself. I just don't think it's a radical update. It is very important. I mean, things with wallets behaving like smart contracts, batch transaction, gas fee things, a whole bunch of important information that I've looked at, spent a lot of time looking at that. And I think it may be as big of a upgrade as last year's Dencun upgrade, but I just don't think the market impact to price is going to really move the needle a whole heck of a lot. It's been somewhat hyped, but really it helps scale layer 2s, and layer 2s are really, they're really sucking money out of Ethereum if you look at it, what's going on. But I don't want to get too deep into that. I will tell you that it is a pretty big upgrade. If you're interested, you can do a little research and figure it out. And we can maybe talk about that on a future show. But I look at the impact to the price of Ethereum as not being monumental short term. So, if you're looking for it to just pop and blow up and go through the roof, I just don't think that's going to happen. Now, this is certainly not financial advice. I'm not your financial advisor. Do your own research, make your own decisions. I'm just telling you what's in this small brain here. So with that, again, is a major update, a very major update, but short-term price impact, I just don't think it's going to be massive. It could be have some long-term implications, but it's one of their big updates for now. That being said, let's move into the next big piece of news that's going to come out this week. And there's been a lot of pressure on the Fed. A lot of pressure on the Fed by the current administration to drop the rates. And if you'll remember, they dropped the rates last year before the election. I think it was premature. I think it was politically motivated. I do think the Fed is partisan to some degree. Everyone has their beliefs. They say they're beholden to the numbers. If they were, they would have probably not dropped the rates then and probably have dropped them now. Inflation has come down significantly. The price of gas, the price of oil has come down almost 25 to 30% since January. That's massive. It's lower than it was during the last 4 years. The price of gas is coming down. And the reason why I'm talking about that is that the price of gas is involved in every single, or I should say oil, is involved in just about every single goods or service that's out there. You have to use energy, fuel to get to work. You've got to use fuel to deliver things, whether it be overseas, across the country, to a different town. You have to use oil in lots of manufacturing processes. So the price of oil has come down almost 25 to 30%, and now you're seeing the cost of goods come down in the inflationary data that we've seen. That being said, the Fed is worried future looking about inflation data mixed with the tariffs. Because, if you raise the taxes on everything, taxes are usually passed through to the consumer, which would rise the price of these things. And I understand the increased concern on this. And, dropping of the rates right now probably, it would be prudent to see what happens to some degree because the data on the unemployment is still strong. Unemployment rate hasn't really changed. It's at 4.2%. So I do not think the Fed is going to drop the rate whatsoever in May. In fact, I believe that they're going to have some pretty strong language condemning the tariffs, or at least making the tariffs look like a very bad move for our country, which I certainly don't agree. That's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me, and that's okay. And then we're all allowed to have different opinions and still get along. That being said, I do believe that the Fed is going to do something different. I just think that they're going to do something different. And I've talked about right now, they're doing quantitative tightening. That means they're selling their assets off their books. They have about $6 trillion of assets on their books. At one point, they had almost $10 trillion of assets. And that's one of the tools they use to affect the money supply. After rates go to zero and they have no more tools, at least with the rates, and they don't want to pay you to take their money, although they've done that in some other countries. It's called a negative interest rate. But if they don't want to do that, they can sell or buy assets. If they sell the assets they have on their books, that's quantitative tightening because they're putting a more supply in there. And that when you sell something, it lowers the price and it raises the effective yield on those bonds. And they've been doing this with mortgage-backed securities. And they've been doing it with Treasury T-bills. And so they lowered their quantitative tightening from 25 billion sale of T-bills monthly to 5 billion, but they didn't touch mortgage-backed securities. They're still selling $35 billion a month mortgage-backed securities. It's kept the rates high on mortgages, and that's by design to keep the cost of living high. Or at least yes, it's meant for new people coming into the market to be dissuaded so they don't buy and the price doesn't go up of houses to keep the cost of living lower than it is, even though the cost of living is raised by the interest rates. Very conflicting, I understand, and I'm very, very sorry if I confused you there. But long story short is I believe they're going to mention something crazy, like they're going to use the sale of their MBS. I don't think they're going to slow down MBS purchase. I think they're going to use the sale of the MBS to buy treasuries. That would be probably the first time they've done that. Quantitative easing is when they buy the goods, it runs the price up and lowers the effective yield or the interest rate. It lowers the cost of borrowing for everybody. And so does lowering the federal funds rate, but they're just not going to do that. They're going to dig in and hold their ground on this one. That's my prediction. I could be wrong. We'll find out what happens on May 7th. If I'm wrong, no big deal. We all make bad decisions or bad guesses sometimes. But everything the Fed is saying right now leans me to believe, and looking at the market, even though inflation has cooled significantly, the job market's still strong, and that they can keep the rates high as to not spur further inflation. That being said, the next major event we're going to see is just all the economic data that's going to be released this week. Big ones, obviously Wednesday. Oh, you can't see that. Obviously Wednesday, they have the FOMC meeting. That's going to dominate the headlines on Wednesday, just dominate them. But Thursday, initial jobless claims. Oh, by the way, the FOMC meeting results are 2 p.m. on Wednesday. Look for a lot of volatility on Wednesday. In the morning, they might be a sell-off or a buy, and that might completely shift at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. So be very, very, very careful. Initial jobless claims on Thursday. U.S. productivity, wholesale inventories. The big one here is the jobless claims. It's expected for 230,000. If you see more than that, it'll do one thing to the market. If you see less than that, it'll do another. If the data is all in line, and all the things point in the same direction, that's one thing. But lately we've had conflicting data, like this is good and this is bad and this is bad and this is good. So, if the jobless claims come in way higher than expected, expect the market to react one way. If it comes in way lower than expected, expect the market to react a different way. But the governors speak on Friday, and that's when you kind of get the insight to the meeting. Obviously the notes are going to be very well scripted. They're not going to say a lot of things out of touch. Fed Chair Powell speaks at 2:30 p.m. So after the results come out, the results typically follow a specific format, and they usually, kind of just shift a word here and there. And from that, people speculate and make some pretty big decisions quickly. But then they tune into the Fed Powell conversation afterwards, and that's when he's going to give a lengthy discussion of why they made the decision they did and what they're looking at. That could potentially move markets always. So other than that, you have Friday, a lot of the Fed governors will speak. They all have a vote, so their voices are very powerful, and you get to hear it from their perspective as well. But that being said, that is the last major thing that I'm looking at for this week. So all in all, we have a pretty eventful week between Ethereum's massive major update, which I don't think will move markets. You have Saylor buying more Bitcoin more than likely. He signaled that in his Twitter X, the Crypto X feed yesterday or 2 days ago. You got the Fed meeting. And all this economic data, really the unemployment's to watch. So with that, that's all I got. I hope you got some value out of this. And if you did, do me a favor. If you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. And if you haven't hit the like button and you made this far, just do me that one solitary favor, and I really would appreciate it. That's all I got. Have a good one, and I will see you next time.